It's been 11 years since Big Blue, the gigantic 567-foot crane used to construct the Milwaukee Brewers Miller Park Stadium, came crashing down, killing 3 ironworkers, while lifting a 9,000 square foot section of a retractable roof weighing almost 1 million pounds. Today, for the first time ever since that fateful day on July 14, 1999, the Insider Exclusive takes a look back in this exclusive special with a behind-the-headline story of the survivors and their lawyer, Robert Habush, president and senior partner of Habush, and Rotier, and how he got justice for these victims: 3 ironworkers, 3 husbands, and 3 fathers: Jeff Wisher, Bill DeGrave, and Jerome Starr, and their families. You see actual footage of how the crash happened, as it happened, from video shot by a safety inspector on the ground, and how this twisted wreckage of a massive construction crane spilled over the crushed shell of the city's newest landmark.
Hey, watch it, watch it!
The community rallied around the project after the accident, where a lot of little bickering became pretty insignificant. The crash set the project back just 1 year as workers quickly set out to repair the damage and complete the ballpark. They did it in the memory of the guys that had fallen, and you can't ask for better than that. And in the end, the accident at Miller Park has left a legacy of increased safety awareness for crane operators and the construction industry as a whole. What Miller Park did was heighten the awareness of what safety really means and how things can go wrong in just a split second. In the long process on the road to justice for these victims, Robert Habush and his firm spent over 15 months of discovery before the start of the trial on October 16, 2000. During trial preparation, 122 depositions were taken and over 150,000 pages of documents were reviewed. After a 7-week trial on December 1st, 2000, the 16-member jury returned a unanimous verdict in favor of these fallen heroes in the amount of $99,250,000 in damages. $94 million of it was in punitive damages against Mitsubishi. The jury found Mitsubishi 97% negligent and Lamson 3% negligent. This is the single highest verdict in the state of Wisconsin. Mitsubishi appealed the verdict, but the verdict was upheld at the Wisconsin Supreme Court level. This case also set a precedent for punitive damage law in the state of Wisconsin. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the law firm of Habush, and Rotier. It is my great pleasure to introduce Bob Habush to the show. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and why you became a lawyer to begin with.
Well, first I'll tell you about the firm. We have 35 lawyers. We're in 13 offices just in Wisconsin. We do strictly plaintiffs' personal injury work. We don't represent insurance companies. We don't represent corporations, all individuals. And basically we do fires, explosions, product liability, medical malpractice, vehicular accidents, professional liability, some of the rather heavy cases that require a lot of time and a lot of money. It wasn't always that way, but that's how it's evolved into.
A lot of people know who you are because of some of the more spectacular cases that you've handled. One of them we're going to talk about today, which we like to call the Big Blue crane case,
right,
which was involved with the building of the Milwaukee Brewers Miller Park Stadium. Tell us a little bit about this case and what happened exactly.
Well, the roof, which was going to be a retractable roof, was being constructed and installed by the Mitsubishi Corporation. And they because of the enormity of the weight of the roof pieces, they leased a crane which was 500 feet tall. They nicknamed it Big Blue. in order to have a crane large enough to handle these roof pieces. That crane was distributed and made by Lamson Corporation and Lamson International. And they sent their crew over with the crane to operate the crane during the operations.
This is how most of these huge stadium retractable roofs get built anyway, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, the retractable roof has been a somewhat recent development in stadiums,
Yeah.
especially in climate like we have in Wisconsin, where you would, in the spring, when it's rainy and cold and miserable, you would have to postpone all your games. So
Right.
this allows you to play during rain and snow and everything else. But anyways, this work site, we found out later, had been accustomed to pretty loose safety requirements, and they were in a hurry, they were behind schedule. Mitsubishi, but in particular, was behind schedule on getting the roofs lifted, and they were over budget, a recipe for future disaster.
Right, because the contractor has his neck on the line, if you will.
That's right. They had a penalty provision that they had to finish by a certain.
Yeah.
So there was financial incentives to rush things along, which of course is what eventually happened.
Now we're showing diagrams which show how big each one of these pieces of the roof were. I think there were, what, 31 pieces, something like that.
It was enormous.
And they're the equivalent of, width-wise, something like 3 times the wingspan of 3 747s together, and each one of them weighed almost 1 million pounds.
Yeah, if you looked at the roof piece and you see on that chart, it has a lot of open space on it. So a person would think that, well, wind wouldn't affect it because the wind would go through all these what look like windows. In fact, the dimensions of the roof were such that it was similar to 747 wings, so it was a wind catcher, or another way of putting it, it was like a sail.
Yes.
And a layperson wouldn't have thought that that would have been a problem, but when you calculate the amount of surface involved on that roof piece and you put it up in the air, it acts just like a sail.
On July 14th, 1999, tell us what went wrong that day.
It was a windy day, even by Milwaukee standards. The winds were 15 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour with wind gusts over 25, even reaching 30 miles an hour. And the weather stations all prognosticated that it was going to be a windy day. They had scheduled a roof piece, which was called 4R3, and that morning they had a meeting. And they said, well, we'll monitor the wind situation. They knew it was windy. The crane itself had limitations of 20 miles an hour, just the crane, without considering the wind action on the piece, the roof piece that was being lifted.
And when you say limitations, that means when the wind hits 20 miles per hour, they got to stop working.
That's right. The manufacturer had a load chart which indicated don't operate this crane in winds over 20 miles an hour. They were required to do a wind calculation on the piece they were lifting, where they calculate what the additional restrictions would be because of the size of the roof piece.
Right.
Mitsubishi was supposed to have done it. They claim that Lamson should have done it. Lamson claims that they should have done it, but it wasn't done, which was a very, very serious omission on their part.
As you found out later, it wasn't done intentionally, right?
They just didn't do it.
Right.
You know, they didn't care. I mean, I always believed that Mitsubishi knew if they had done one, they wouldn't have been able to do a lift on that particular day and maybe other days, because it would have shown that the restrictions then would have gone down. In other words, would have been even less than 20. Don't with this piece, don't even lift when it's 10 miles an hour.
We're showing right now this piece of the roof. It's being lifted. What happens?
Well, when it gets above the outer perimeter of the stadium, the wind catches it and literally pulls the crane over. The crane is designed to withstand side forces. It's a huge crane. But there are forces that even that huge crane could not withstand, and in the basic bottom of that crane a very important piece breaks. And then the next piece breaks. It's like dominoes.
Yes.
And the crane then just completely collapses on top of the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
When it collapses over the stadium, there are 3 men who are in what we call a man bucket, because they were watching the lift, and they eventually would go down and do the fastening. These were the 3 fellows who died in this incident.
Mm-hmm.
The crane, that Big Blue, fell into their crane. And their crane then collapsed, and these 3 guys fell over 200 feet to their death.
Yeah, and I understand it took like 14 seconds for this whole thing.
Yeah, because there's a video which you've shown.
Yeah.
We could time how long it took from the time that crane hit their crane and their man bucket to the time it hit the floor, and it was 14 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to calculate the amount of time for these men who are now falling to their certain death.
Yes.
Had to realize that they were about to die.
Talk a little bit about the safety requirements that Mitsubishi, that contractor, failed to observe, and what led up to this too, because from my understanding, there were people that had voiced their concern about Mitsubishi not following proper safety requirements 2 weeks before.
Right, we were able to approve a course of conduct over months of where they would just forget about safety requirements and have people working at times they shouldn't have been working at weather conditions they shouldn't have been working. And there was one fellow named Bengston, who was a senior supervisor for Lamson, who complained about their loose safety practices.
Right.
Well, Mitsubishi executives went to the Lamson executives and said, "You've got to fire this guy. He's holding up our construction project." And so they fired Milo, which was a signal to the other workers there, open your mouth, you're out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stifled opposition and complaints. So this was a pattern of conduct that just led up to what turned out to be almost an inevitable tragedy.
Now, I understand that after the accident happened, there was a cover-up.
Well, this is all discovered, through your depositions, and apparently the dust hadn't settled yet. The bodies were laying on the ground, and this guy Grotlich, the senior supervisor
For Mitsubishi.
Site for Mitsubishi,
Yes.
he and another employee go back to their trailer.
That's Victor Grotlich, right?
Victor Grotlich
Yes.
goes back to their trailer, and in the trailer they had a computer that was reporting on weather. And they then proceeded to disconnect the computer, which wiped out all the previous recordings on that computer of the wind. Because he probably knew at that time he was in deep doo-doo over flying this piece in this wind. Now, the investigators then swooped in from the DA's office, the sheriff's department, OSHA, etc. And by the time they got to that trailer, which was many hours later, there was no evidence of what the wind speeds were on that computer.
And their response as to why there wasn't any evidence?
They don't know. They don't know who. They don't know who pulled the plug out of the wall.
There was a 7-week trial.
7 weeks, right?
And the verdict was?
Well, the total verdict was $99,250,000, of which $94 million was punitive damages, punishment damages.
I understand this is the single highest verdict in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, at that time and since, there's never been a higher personal injury verdict.
And then after that, they appealed it, obviously.
Well, they appealed it to the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
A couple unfriendly judges there didn't think that the standard that I interpreted my way was correct, and they interpreted it that Mitsubishi had to go out and intend to kill these guys, like a criminal,
Right.
criminal intent. So they took away the $94 million, and we then appealed to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they reinstated the $94 million.
Today we are fortunate to have with us one of the survivors, Trish, and we're going to bring her on the set right now. It is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Trish, Jeff Wisher's widow. Welcome to the show, Trish.
Thank you.
Take us back to that day, July 14th, 1999. Your husband was in a man basket. And what happened? When did you hear the news?
I was actually at work. Jeff had called me earlier and told me that the lift wasn't going to happen, so he'd be home shortly. So I went ahead and left for work, and I got a call at work because there was the owner of the business actually had, her family was in the trade also, and they said that Big Blue had gone down and there were people injured. And at that time, I knew it was him because we had a deal that if there was ever an accident on a job, that he was to call immediately, and he would call me and say, hey, I'm okay, just wanted to let you know there was an accident, but I'm okay. So that was pretty much, I knew it was that, and didn't get my phone call.
And you hadn't heard from your husband? Nothing.
I hadn't heard from anybody.
But you're having really bad vibes.
Yeah, I knew it was one of those. So when I went home, my kids were there and they were watching TV, and my son told me, he said, Mom, you got to get to Miller Park. He said, something happened to Daddy. And he knew. It was one of those, we knew.
Your husband had expressed some real safety concerns leading up to the accident, hadn't he?
Yes.
What had he been saying?
There was a lot of problems with it. They weren't requiring safety harnesses. They were doing lifts that they weren't quite into place. They didn't have the plans in place when they were supposed to. They weren't doing their calculations. He said, I can't use the words that he said, but he said Mitsubishi stood for all up. So that was his basic concerns with it.
Your husband was an iron worker.
Yes.
Bob was telling me that the iron workers are kind of an unusual breed. They stick together. They're like firefighters, policemen, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
It's a tough job. It's
Yes.
a dangerous job, right? And you were always, every family is always concerned about what might happen on these jobs, because they're up high, aren't they?
A lot of times, yeah. They work the ground. They also work high. His brother's an iron worker and his dad's an iron worker.
Right.
So.
How did you end up coming to Bob? That's kind of an unusual story in itself, isn't it?
Well, actually, because my husband was concerned about what was going on down there, he told me that if anything ever happens to me, he said, before you ever go to the hospital, before you ever do anything, he said, call the Habish Law Firm. They can meet you at the hospital. And he said, just do that. He goes, trust me.
What's your life like today?
I enjoy my life. I have 3 beautiful grandchildren now. I own a catering business. I sell fashion jewelry. But yeah, I just had kind of a little bit of a breakthrough this last year where I'm not angry anymore.
Right.
And this has been 10 years.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to be with us today, and our best to you, and God bless you. What a story, what a client, did a great job. When you take a case, how do you determine, first of all, whether you're going to take it to trial or whether you're going to settle it, or even if you're going to take the case?
Every case is prepared for trial in this law firm. We don't prepare a case for settlement. You don't know where it's going to end up, but you want to be in a position where the other side knows that as far as you're concerned, you'd rather try the case than settle the case. Sometimes you have economic pressure brought by the client. In this case, there was no economic pressure.
Right.
They were angry. They wanted me to kill these guys in the courtroom.
Yes.
So I didn't have any pressure from the clients. So I was determined this was going to go to trial. And although there were overtures made before trial, I rebuffed them. We were able to pick up some partial settlements from some extraneous defendants who were not my target. So they had some money in the bank already. So this case was never going to settle.
Right.
And so your whole psychological attitude and the intensity of the preparation is different when you know you're going to go.
As a result of this case and the huge verdict, rightfully earned and rightfully fought for, there's an annual Trial Lawyers Award named in honor of you, isn't there?
Well, the local trial lawyers named their Trial Lawyer of the Year award after me, but it wasn't just because of this case. It was for decades of contribution to the bar and other cases in the past, and I was very proud that they were able to do that. This case was just one of the reasons.
There's a lot of accidents in the construction industry. Would you say this case brought about some major changes for safety?
Oh, I don't have any doubt about it. And it's all brought by the insurance companies who have to end up paying these awards. So they increase their monitoring, they increase their safety inspections. This was reported nationwide. So all the heavy industry contractors knew about this. They didn't want it to happen to them. And it was the punitive damage, Steve, that got their attention.
The 94
It was
million.
the punishment.
Yeah.
You know, just a regular compensatory damage thing wouldn't have got their attention.
Right.
It was the punitive damage and the size of the punitive damage that was the wake-up call that we don't ever want to get into this situation, because that's embarrassing. You know, that's conduct that's being punished.
Right.
And that's the best deterrent to future tragedies like this that you could ever imagine.
Well, Bob, I'm glad we did this show on this case. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you very much for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at InsiderExclusive.com.